Welcome back to Dracula Daily, and today my reading stamina will be tested. Let's say that. But yes, we will get a lot more news from an actual newspaper clipping. So let's continue, shall we? August 8th. Cutting from the Daily Graph, passed in Mina Murray's journal. From a correspondent, Whitby. One of the greatest and suddenest storm on record has just been experienced here, with results both strange and unique. The weather had been somewhat sultry, but not to a degree uncommon in the month of August. Saturday evening was as fine as was ever known, and the great body of holidaymakers laid out yesterday for visits to Mulgrave Woods, Robin Hood's Bay, Rick Mill, Runswick, Staithe, and various trips in the neighborhood of Whitby. Dear UK people, if I butchered any of these names, I'm very sorry. The steamers Emmer and Scarborough made trips up and down the coast, and there was an unusual amount of tripping both to and from Whitby. The day was unusually fine till the afternoon, when some of the gossip who frequent the East Cliff churchyard and from what commanding eminence watched the wide sweep of sea visible to the north and east called attention to a sudden show of mare-tails high in the sky to the northwest. The wind was then blowing from the southwest in a middle degree, which in barometrical language is ranked number 2 light breeze. Coast Guard on duty at once made report, and one old fisherman who for more than half a century has kept watch on weather signs from the East Cliff foretold in an empathetic manner the coming of a sudden storm. The approach of sunset was very beautiful, so grand in its masses of splendid colored clouds that there was quite an assemblage on the walk along the cliff in the churchyard to enjoy the beauty. I'm warning you, this is a very detailed and long weather report coming in. Also, I'm sorry that I already have to interrupt, but I have to ask myself, what flavor of hyperfixation, special interest is Bram Stoker's to give us a full account like this in so much details that is completely unnecessary? Yes, it is very cool to make it clear that storm was very sudden and that storm was kind of weird, considering anything, because it's correct, because it's a supernatural one made by Dracula. But really? But I love this. I love seeing a special interest of an author in things like this. So maybe I'll look it up. Maybe I'll find out if Bram Stoker was a weather nerd. But let's continue. Before the sun dipped below the black mass of Kettleness, standing boldly athwart the western sky, its downward waves was marked by myriad clouds of every sunset color, flame purple, pink, green, violet, and all the tints of gold, with here and there masses not large, but of seemingly absolute blackness, in all sorts of shape, as well outlined as colossal silhouettes. The experience was not lost on the painters, and doubtless some of the sketches of the prelude to the great storm will grace the RA or RI waltz in May next. More than one captain made up his mind then and there that his cobble or his mule, as the terms the different classes of boats, would remain in the harbor till the storm had passed. The wind fell away entirely during the evening, and at midnight there was a dead calm, a sultry heat, and that prevailing intensity which, on the approach of thunder, affects persons of a sensitive nature. There were but a few lights inside at sea, for even the coasting steamers, which usually hugged the shore so closely, kept well to seaward, and but few fishing boats were in sight. The only sail noticeable was a foreign schooner with all sails set, which was seemingly going westwards. The foolhardiness or ignorance of her officers was a prolific theme for comment whilst she remained in sight, and efforts were made to signal her to reduce sail in face of her danger. Before the night shut down, she was seen with sails idly flapping, and she gently rolled on the undulating swell of the sea. as idle as a painted ship upon a painted ocean. Shortly before 10 o'clock, the stillness of the air grew quite oppressive, and the silence was so marked that the bleating of the sheep inland and the barking of a dog in the town was distinctly heard, and the band on the pier, with its lively French air, was like a discord in the great harmony of nature's silence. A little after midnight came a strange sound from over the sea, and high overhead the air began to carry a strange, faint and hollow booming. Then without a warning, the tempest broke, with a rapidity, Jesus Christ, which at times seemed incredible, and even afterwards is impossible to realize. The whole aspect of nature at once became convulsed. The waves rose in growing fury, each overtopping its fellow, till in a very few minutes the lately glassy sea was like a roaring and devouring monster. White-crested waves beat madly on the level sands and rushed up the shelving cliffs. Others broke over the piers, and with their spume swept the lanthorns of the lighthouses which rise from the end of either pier of Whitby Harbour. The wind roared like thunder and blew with such force that it was with difficulty that even strong men kept their feet, or clung with grim clasp to the iron stanchions. It was found necessary to clear the entire piers from the mass of onlookers, or else the fatalities of the night would have been increased manifold. To add to these difficulties and dangers of the time, masses of sea fog came drifting inland, wide wet clouds which swept by in ghostly fashion, so dank and damp and cold that it needed but little effort of imagination to think that the spirits of those lost at seas were touching their living brethren with the clammy hands of death, and on many a one shrouded as the wreath of sea mist swept by. At times the mist cleared, and the sea for some distance could be seen in the glare of the lightning, which now came thick and fast, followed by such sudden peals of thunder that the whole sky overhead seemed trembling under the shock of the footsteps of the storm. Some of the scenes thus revealing were of immeasurable grandeur and of absorbing interest. The sea, running mountains high, flew skyward with each wave, mighty masses of white foam, which the tempest seemed to snatch at and whirl away into space. Here and there a fishing boat with a rack of sails running madly for shelter before the blast. Now and again the wide wings of the storm tossed seabird. On the summit of East Cliff the new search sea light was ready for experiment, but had not yet been tried. The officers in charge of it got it into working order, and in the pauses of the inrushing mist swept it with the surface of the sea. Once or twice its service was most effective, as when a fishing boat with gunwale on the water rushed into the harbour, able, by the guidance of the sheltering light, to avoid the dangers of dashing against the piers. Each boat achieved the safety of the port. There was a shout of joy from the masses of the people on shore, a shout which for a moment seemed to cleave the gale, and was then swept away in its rush. Before long the searchlight discovered some distance away a schooner with all sails set, apparently the same vessel which had been noticed earlier in the evening. The wind had by this time backed to the east, and there was a shudder amongst the watchers on the cliff as they realized the terrible danger in which she now was. Between her and the port lay the grey flat reef on which so many good ships have from time to time suffered, and with the wind blowing from its present quarter, it would be quite impossible that she should fetch the entrance of the harbour. It was now nearly the hour of high tide, but the waves were so great that in their throes the shallows of the shore were almost invisible, and the schooner, with all sails set, was rushing with such speed, in the words of one old soul, she must fetch up somewhere if it was only in hell. Then came another rush of sea fog, greater than any hitherto, a mass of dank mist which seemed to close on all things like a grey pall, and left available to men only the organ of hearing, for the roar of the tempest and the crash of the thunder and the booming of the mighty billows came through the damp oblivion even louder than before. The rays of the searchlights were kept fixed on the harbour's mouth across the east pier, where the shock was expected, and men waited breathless. The wind suddenly shifted to the northeast, and a remnant of the sea fog melted in the blast, and then Mirabeldic too, between the piers, leaping from the wave to wave as it rushed at headlong speed, swept the strange schooner before the blast with all sails set and gained the safety of the harbor. The searchlight followed her, and a shudder ran through all who saw her, for lashed to helm was a corpse with drooping head which swung horribly to and fro at each motion of the ship. No other form could be seen on the deck at all. A great awe came on all that realized that the ship, as if by a miracle, had found the harbor, unsteered safe by the hand of a dead man. However, all took place more quickly than it takes to write these words. The schooner paused not, but rushing across the harbor, pitched herself on that accumulation of sand and gravel, washed by many tides and many shores, into the southeast corner of the pier, jutting around under the east cliff, known locally as Tate Hill Pier. There was, of course, a considerable concussion as the vessel drove up on the sand heap. Every spar, rope, and tay was strained, and some of the top hammer came crashing down. But strangest of all, the very instant the shore was touched, an immense dog sprang on the deck below, and if shot up by the concussion and running forward, jumped from the bow on the sand, making straight for the steep cliff where the churchyard hangs over the laneway to the east pier, so steeply that some of the flat tombstones, throthins or throwstones, as they call them in the Whitby vernacular, almost actually project over where the sustaining cliff has fallen away. It disappeared in the darkness, which seemed intensified just beyond the focus on the searchlight. A weird big dog, you say? Well, I'm not finished yet. It so happened that there was no one at the moment on Tate Hill Pier, as all those whose houses are in close proximity were either in bed or were out on the heights above. Thus the Coast Guard on duty on the eastern side of the harbor, who at once ran down to the little pier, was the first to climb on board. The men working the searchlight, after scouring the entrance of the harbor without seeing anything, then turned the light on the derelict and kept it there. The Coast Guard ran aft, and when he became beside the wheel, bent over to examine, and it recoiled at once, though under some sudden emotion. This seemed to pique general curiosity, and quite a number of people began to run. It is a good way round from the west cliff to the drawbridge, from the west cliff by the drawbridge to the Tate Hill Pier, but your correspondent is a fairly good runner and came well ahead of the crowd. Sorry, but that... Such an incredible thing that this reporter just bolted. When I arrived, however, I found already assembled on the pier a crowd whom the Coast Guard and police refused to allow to come on board. By the courtesy of the chief boatman, I was, as your correspondent, permitted to climb on deck, and was one of the small group who saw the dead seaman whilst actually lashed to the wheel. It was no wonder that the Coast Guard was surprised or even awed, for not often can such a sight have been seen. The man was simply fastened by his hands, tied one over the other to a spoke of the wheel. Between the inner hand and the wood was a crucifix, the set of beads on which it was fastened being around both wrists and wheel, and all kept fast by the binding cords. The poor fellow may have been seated at one time, but the flapping and buffeting of the sails had worked through the rudder of the wheel and dragged him to and fro, so that the cords which had tied had cut the flesh to the bone. Accurate note was made of the state of things, and a doctor, Surgeon J.M. Caffin of 33 East Elliot Place, who came immediately after me, declared after making examination that the man has been dead for quite 2 days. In his pocket was a bottle, carefully corked, empty save for a little roll of paper, which proved to be the addendum to the log. The Coast Guard said the man must have tied up his own hands, fastening the knots with his teeth. The fact that the Coast Guard was the first on board may save some complications later on in the Admiralty Court, for Coast Guard cannot claim the salvage, which is the right of the first civilian entering on a derelict. Already, however, the legal tongues are wagging, and one young law student is loudly asserting that the rights of the owner are already completely sacrificed, his property being held in contravention of the statutes of Mortmain. Since the tiller, as ambush ship, is not proof of delegated possession, it's held in a dead hand. It is needless to say that the dead steersman has been reverently removed from the place where he held his honorable watch and ward till death, a steadfastness as noble as of the young Casabianca, and placed in a mortuary to await inquest. Already the sudden storm is passing, and its fierceness is abating. Crowds are scattering homewards, and the sky is beginning to redden over the Yorkshire wolds. I shall send in time for the next issue further details of the derelict ship which found her way so miraculously into the harbor in storm. Wow. But let's continue, because this was in Mina's journal, which means there is a bit more to come around, and Mina's commentary on the day. Mina Murray's journal. Lucy was very restless all night, and I too could not sleep. The storm was fearful as it boomed loudly among the chimney pots, and it made me shudder. With a sharp puff came it seemed to be like a distant gun. Strangely enough, Lucy did not wake, but she got up twice and dressed herself. Fortunately, each time I woke in time and managed to undress her without waking her and got her back to bed. It is a very strange thing, the sleepwalking, for as soon as Sir Willis thought in any physical way, her intention, if there be any, disappears, and she yields herself almost exactly to the routine of her life. Early in the morning we both got up and went down the harbour to see if anything had happened in the night. There were very few people about, and though the sun was bright and the air clear and fresh, the big grim-looking waves that seemed dark themselves because of the foam that topped him was like snow, forced themselves in through the narrow mouth of the harbour, like a bullying man going through a crowd. Somehow I felt glad that Jonathan was not on sea last night, but on land. But is he on land or sea? Where is he and how? I'm getting fearfully anxious about him, and if I only knew what to do and could do anything. The Demeter made it? Well, this is horrifying. And what I absolutely love about Dracula as a whole is that we as the reader, we are the only person in this scenario who know what's happening from our side. We know what happened to Jonathan, more or less. We know who Dracula is. We know what happened on the ship exactly. But also know having this coincidence of Dracula being exactly there where Jonathan Harker's fiancé currently is there are a lot of other interpretations on connection here, but there is none. It is weirdly just a coincidence in my eyes, but it makes the dread so much worse because at one hand, maybe at one point, Dracula just walks around and Mina finds out who he is, and then that starts, or Jonathan comes back, sees Dracula, and then we will see how that goes. But it's a lot. It's a lot, and I'm kind of happy that we're through the Demeter arc, just for my sake, because my god, the dread is a lot. But we will continue, and we will get some additional information the next time. Until then.